Did you know that death made Jesus cry? John chapter 11 tells us a story about when he lost a friend of his. It made Jesus cry, not because he knew he wouldn't see his friend again, but because of the sorrow that it caused the people that he loved. If you've lost someone that you love, you know that the saying is true that says death is harder on the living than it is for those who have died. This episode of the Barely Believing podcast, we're going to look at what the Bible says about death, the hope that we have beyond the grave, and how to deal with it while we wait to see them again. Stick with me on the Barely Believing podcast. Hi, friends. It's Pastor Dustin again with you. So excited to be sharing this series of nine episodes that are companion episodes for our revival meetings, our in-person revival meetings. We are going to be doing every single year in the spring a revival series, and very practical to revive our faith or maybe introduce you to faith if you've never really gone down that road before. But these are really practical, useful, real-life issues that we're dealing with in this series, and this one is no exception. What happens when you die, and what do we do while we wait to see our loved ones again? It's going to be good. I know you're going to be blessed by this one. But I do want to say that if you would like to get more information about the revival we're currently doing, it's March 7 through 14. So if you're seeing this episode during that time frame and you're in the Augusta area, please come down. And you want to have more information about where we are and how to connect with us, go to our website, barelypod.com. And I'll also say on the website, you can access the study guide that goes along with this episode, and also the live meeting that we're going to be holding in just a few days. So you can access all the material there on the website, on the revival page. And if you want to email us, there's our email, barelybelievingpod@gmail.com. And as I need to say every single episode, please subscribe to our channels. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Barely Believing Podcast, and also on Spotify. That not only allows you to make sure you don't miss any of the content, but it also helps us because it tells YouTube that people like our channel. And the more people that like our channel, the more it will expose other people to our material. So when you subscribe, when you share the content, when you comment, when you like, it helps the podcast to grow. All right, commercials out of the way. I want to get to this issue of death. There's a lot of different ideologies out there about what happens when you die. And it's confusing. And amongst Christians, there's not a lot of agreement about what happens when you die. There's opinions all over the place. Amongst world religions, it's even greater diversity in those beliefs. So the first thing we're going to do today is first look at what the Bible actually says about death. And what I'm going to say is, at first, for those of you that this is new to, you're going to think this isn't comforting at all. But if you actually stop and break this down and think about it, it makes it so easy and so simple that it's more comforting than any of the other theories that are out there. What we're going to be presenting, I believe, to be clear Bible truth, uncomplicated, unfiltered. And then once we understand what death is, we're going to look at how Jesus says, or how Jesus relates to us in our sorrow, and that's going to bring us some peace and hope. So the first thing I want to bring up here, have you ever heard of Occam's razor? Occam was a guy, we're not going to get into his history, but it's this ideology or this principle that says the simplest explanation is probably the best one. So in other words, the more complicated a theory or an idea gets, the less likely it is to be true. And it gives us, this little graphic gives us an interesting analogy to that. So say you were to never see a cow before, and all of a sudden you're walking through a field and you come upon this weird-looking creature. It's black and white and spotted, and it's got drool running out of its nose, and these big udders, and you don't understand what you're looking at. And so the theory could be, well, what is this strange creature? Maybe it comes from outer space. Maybe it's, animal and alien DNA mixed together and it's some mutant. See how complicated the theory's getting? And this is what makes conspiracy theories often so unlikely, is that they're so complicated. That's another topic for another day. But the simplest explanation is often the correct one. Well, that's just a cow. Someone come along and say, well, that's just a natural animal you see every day. It's just a cow, right? So the simplest explanation is often the most correct or the most plausible one. And it's no different when it comes to death. And as I said earlier, there's a whole bunch of different theories about what happens when somebody dies. And I think it actually contributes to our fear of death, and it contributes to our sorrow when somebody dies because we're not really sure what happened to them. And it gets really complicated. Do you see a white light and follow a tunnel? Do you meet St. Peter at the pearly gates and wait in a long line? Do people go to hell and burn in hell? Is there reincarnation and karma and all that? Do they go to purgatory and sort of learn from their sins or mistakes that they made here in this life? Are we disembodied spirits? A lot of people have this ideology, idea that we're in this world and they're floating around as disembodied spirits. Well, what really happens when we die? Let's go back to the principle of Occam's razor. The most simple explanation is probably the correct one. Let's take this a little step further. So the first thing that we need to know from the Bible is that you don't have a soul. You are a soul. Now, the idea that mankind has an immortal or eternal soul within us, it actually isn't taught in Scripture. It actually comes from Greek mythology. And they taught this dualism. So there was a life inside you, and then there's a body that you have. And then there's all these different theories in the ancient world about what happens to that immortal or eternal soul when somebody dies, and then what happens to the body. And spirits go to the underworld, and all these different beliefs about mythology. And as sort of Judaism and mythology intermingled and the cultures intermingled, the beliefs got watered down and muddied up. So really what we need to understand is that the Bible teaches that the nature of a person is one. You can't separate body, soul, spirit. They're all one. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So it says in Genesis chapter 2, this is talking about the creation of Adam and Eve, specifically Adam here. So I believe it's Jesus. He goes and he forms Adam out of the dust of the earth. And when he's finished creating this man, there's no life in him yet. So he stoops down and he breathes the breath of life into Adam's nostrils, it says. And it says, Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7 literally says, and the Lord God breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, and Adam became a living soul. That's what the older translations say. The newer ones say living being or living person. And the reason for that is that the word used there for soul or person or living being is actually the word nephesh in the Hebrew. And the word nephesh literally means living person. So it's saying that he became a living person. So when you think about what we're made up of, we are made up of body, formed out of the dust of the earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, that whole thinking that we have. We're formed from the dirt of this earth. So that's our body. But it's sort of like a light bulb before you flip the switch on. The breath of life that comes from God is what gives us light. It's what gives us life. So when Jesus breathes the breath of life into us, it's like flipping the switch on, flipping the light switch on. So we don't have this immortal soul within us. And think about it this way. Think about this. If you have an eternal or immortal soul, if that's true, where was it before you were born? And this has led Christians to a whole bunch of really complicated beliefs of, well, you lived in heaven before you were born. And when you were born, all of a sudden your soul met your body, and now you were this person that you are now. That is not taught anywhere in the Bible. You can't even sniff a bit of that thinking in the Bible. So where was your soul before you were born? You were given a soul at birth? How does that work? You weren't. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. You're a living being. You're a living soul. There were 50 souls at that music concert. We talk about that. We use that ideology all the time. So the ideology, I keep saying ideology, sorry. The thinking that we have a soul, it really doesn't come from the Bible. It's Greek thought that filtered its way in throughout the years. And it's come down to a lot of Christians, unfortunately. But we're trying to keep it simple. The biblical explanation of death is really simple, or the nature of man is really simple. So you might be thinking, okay, well, what about a spirit? Maybe I have a spirit. You said the breath of life was breathed into me, right? Well, let's look at this. So the Bible teaches that you don't have a spirit, you have the breath of life that God gave you. In Ecclesiastes chapter 12, Solomon says this, and we're talking about death. And the body returns to the dust where it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. So remember what we read about Adam. Jesus stooped down, breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, and he became a living being or a living soul, right? So the breath of life is the spirit. It comes from God. It's not us. It's his life-giving essence, his life-giving energy, whatever you want to call it. It comes from God and it's his. And when we die, that breath of life just goes back to where it came from. It goes back to God. Now, don't worry. When we die, it doesn't mean that you are lost. God made you. He knows how he made you. He knows your personality. He knows everything about you. And we're going to see in a few minutes a time where he's going to remake you with all the best parts of you and get rid of the bad parts of you. We'll talk about that in a minute. But biblically, the word spirit is the word ruach. That's the Old Testament word for spirit. It's breath. It's ruach. It's breath. It simply means breath. It doesn't mean immortal. It doesn't mean eternal spirit or life essence. It doesn't mean any of those things. And actually, the Bible never, ever, not once, ever uses the phrase eternal spirit or eternal soul. Never uses that phrase. It's sort of been applied by people over the years. So the word pneuma is the New Testament word for spirit. And if you notice there, pneuma sounds like pneumonia, right? That's a breathing disease, breathing sickness. And so that's because the word spirit or pneuma literally means breath. So we don't have a soul. We don't have an eternal immortal soul. We are a soul. And we don't have an eternal and immortal spirit. We have the breath of life. And when we die, that breath of life goes back to God who gave it. Now, you might be thinking, hang on, this is new to me. Let's go back to our original principle. It's the simplest explanation. That when you're alive, and when you're dead. And the breath of life that God gave you goes back to him. It's super simple. Now, you might be thinking, it's not very comforting, though. We're going to get to this, but just stick with the biblical teaching here. And you might be thinking, wait a second, Pastor, I've heard these verses that talk about things that sound like when you die, you go to heaven, or die, you go to hell, and we have an immortal soul or an immortal spirit. Send those in. I would love to go over those on the podcast. So if you have specific questions about those verses, I'll do an entire episode on one verse or a bunch of verses. If you have those questions, send those in. Let's have that conversation. But the simplest biblical explanation is that you are a soul and you don't have an immortal spirit because that's just the breath of life. So when we die, it's the opposite of creation. The body dies, the spirit or the life-giving breath goes back to God who gave it, right? So what is death then? What actually is death? I'm going to move those scriptures so they're not in my face. So what actually is death? So the Bible refers to death as sleep 30 to 40 times in the Old Testament and 15 to 20 times in the New Testament. And it's so many in the Old Testament because as you're reading through some of the accounts of the kings, it'll say, oh, so-and-so lived and reigned for 50 years and died and went to sleep with his fathers. I was referring to being buried with the previous kings, right? So here's some examples. In Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2, it says, many who sleep in the dust, they're buried. of the earth shall awake. It's talking about the end of the world and the resurrection. That's in Daniel. That's the Old Testament. That's one of those 30 to 40 times. The New Testament in Acts chapter 13 is talking about David. And as the apostle's preaching there, he says, David is both dead and buried, and his grave is still with us to this time. He sleeps with his ancestors. And so let me just read you a couple other examples. Job chapter 14 and verse 12, this is Old Testament again, says, man lies down and does not rise up until the heavens are no more. So he'll rise up when the heavens are no more. We're going to talk about that more here in just a few minutes. 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 15 say, those who are asleep shall hear the voice of Jesus and arise. So death, they're buried and they'll arise, but he says they are asleep. 1 Corinthians 15 says, repeatedly uses the idea of having fallen asleep for death. You can look these up yourself. So the next question is, why does it use the phrase sleep? And some people get this discomforting idea about sleep, like you're actually asleep. But even sleep isn't the best way to describe it. It's really just ceasing to exist, ceasing to live, right? I'm going to tell you in just a second why the Bible actually uses the term sleep. But before we get there, let's stop and survey this. It's super simple. It's super simple. You're alive. You have the breath of life in you that God gave you when you're alive, and you're a living soul. When you die, the breath of life goes back to God, and you cease to live. Super simple. Now you might be thinking, yeah, but it's more comforting to me to think that my loved one lives on and I can talk to them and things. The Bible actually says never talk to the dead. And it says that the dead have nothing to do with anything that happens under the sun ever again. So the dead can't interact with us at all. I know it feels super comforting to be able to think that their presence is still with us, but it really isn't. Their memory is, and don't get me wrong on that. It's comforting to think of that and even kind of talk to their memory sometimes. That's totally normal. But sleep, why sleep? Because sleep, have you ever worked really hard all day long? I mean, hard. Your head hits the pillow and it's like there's no passage of time. And all of a sudden your alarm clock goes off. I've had days like that recently, just working so hard where your head hits the pillow, you don't dream, you don't know any time has passed, and all of a sudden, bam, the alarm clock's going off. There's no passage of time. That's literally what death is. And the alarm clock, as we're going to see in just a few minutes, is the return of Jesus. Put a pin in that, though. So death literally is just a blink of an eye. So for people that die, it's literally just they close their eyes and then they're going to open them again. So for them, no time will have passed at all. None. No time will have passed. So, and there's a reason why the Bible doesn't call the dead dead. It calls the dead asleep. And let me show you what that is. So in Revelation chapter 20, let me read this to you. This is talking about the very end of time, the New Jerusalem and God's throne descend from heaven, and the big judgment takes place. And listen to what it says about the judgment. It says, then I saw a great white throne, the great white throne judgment. We talked about the judgment earlier, but stick with me. And him who was seated on it. From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. We don't fear the judgment anymore. You already saw that episode in this revival series. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in them. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged. It's talking about a resurrection, right? Each of them according to what they had done. Then death and Hades, death and the grave, were thrown into the lake of fire. That's hellfire. Hell, by the way, is not a place. It's an event. That's a different episode, though. Now, this is look what it says. So death and hell are thrown into the lake of fire, which is the second death. And if anyone's name was not written in the book of life, they were thrown into the lake of fire. It called it the second death. And here's the reason why I believe the Bible avoids using the term dead or death for the death that we die in this world, cancer and car accidents and old age. Because biblically, death, the second death, is something that you don't wake up from. It's final. It's complete. It's done. So death is something that you do not wake up from. So Jesus, the Old Testament, the New Testament, avoid using that word death and call it sleep, because this death that you die in this life, to cancer and old age and car accidents and things, that death you wake up from. The Bible avoids using death for the word death for that kind of death, because it's the death biblically. I'm sorry, I'm being confusing here. Death biblically is something that you don't wake up from. It's the second death. It's final. It's the final judgment. You don't come back from that. You do come back from the death you die here in this world. So that's why it uses sleep instead of the word death. Death biblically is something that you don't come back from. Sleep, death, is something that you come back from. You wake up. There's a resurrection. So, will the dead wake up? I'm going to read this passage to you. It's in 1 Thessalonians, written by the Apostle Paul. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. 1 Thessalonians 4, we're going to begin in verse 16. It says, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and who are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and we will always be with the Lord. Look what it says. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. So Paul knew we need encouragement when somebody dies, when somebody passes. We need encouragement. And he says, encourage people with the truth, with the belief, with the knowledge that Jesus is coming back. And when Jesus comes back, there is going to be a grand resurrection. There is going to be a joyous occasion where the people that have died will rise from their grave and we will see them again. So let's break this down again. So we said death is like perfect sleep. You work all day, your head hits the pillow, it feels like no time passes, and the alarm clock goes off. The alarm clock is the return of Jesus. The alarm clock is the return of Jesus. And here's why I believe this is even more comforting than believing our loved one is a ghost or floating around out there or maybe even is in heaven. It takes the guesswork out of it, for one. There's no wondering. How would disembodied spirits live in a physical heaven? The Bible's really clear that heaven is a real place. It has golden streets and gates and animals and all sorts of things. It's a physical place. So how would a disembodied soul interact in a physical place? So that's kind of confusing, right? The other thing is, if your dead loved one is up in heaven watching you, think about what they're watching happen to you. And your life might be easy, but for most of us, life can be hard. So our dead loved one is up in heaven watching people be abused, watching people starve, watching people go through an immense hardship, even mourn their own death. In that scenario, heaven's not heaven, heaven's hell. So in the Bible, what the Bible's trying to teach us is that when somebody dies, they literally just close their eyes. And then the very next thing, there will be no passage of time. When you die and you believe in Jesus, there will be no passage of time. Literally, your eyes will close and your eyes will immediately open, and you'll see Jesus coming in the clouds of glory. No separation. And this will be this grand reunion. Our dead loved ones will live on forever. And I always tell this story when I share this. My grandfather died 20-some years before my grandmother died. I never met my grandfather. And I loved my grandmother, had a great relationship with my grandmother. She helped raise me. But she was plagued with arthritic knees. And this was back before the time where they did a lot of knee replacement surgeries. So she literally would have to stand up from her chair and just wait until the cartilage moved around in her knees enough for her to take a step. She was in immense pain. She would have to cook at the kitchen counter sitting on a stool. Like, she suffered. And so you want me to believe that my grandfather's up in heaven, looking down, watching his wife that he loved suffer through arthritic knees so much she can't even walk for 20-some years. That's not heaven. Or even think about how much it would break the heart of our loved one to look down at us and see us mourning their death. Friends, that's not how this works. Death is just the cessation of life. And for the person that died, it's the perfect sleep. They literally die, no time passes, and then they see Jesus coming. And it's this grand reunion. It's this wonderful reunion where now my grandparents, since they're buried next to each other, no time has passed for them. And so literally what they will see is they'll rise after no passage of time, look up and see Jesus coming, and then look to the side and see each other, and they'll go home together. Look, how beautiful is that? How wonderful is that? It's gorgeous. And I always tell people, move closer to those cemeteries as you see the day approaching when Jesus is going to return, because your dead loved one's going to come out of that grave. Now, if you're not near them, you'll meet each other in heaven on the streets of gold. But imagine that day when that grand reunion takes place. There's been no separation that death has caused for them because there's no passage of time. But the question, well, let me give you another passage that says the same thing. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 51 through 55 says, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep," there it is again, "but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet." So the dead will be changed and the living will be changed. "For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable." Notice that. They did not have imperishable or eternality. They weren't eternal before this event. "And we shall be changed. For this perishable, or be able to die, body must put on imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When this perishable puts on imperishable, and this mortal puts on immortality," at the last trumpet, that's when that happens, "then shall come to pass the saying, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" Beautiful. It's saying when Jesus comes back, that's when we put on immortality. And for the loved ones who have died, no time passes. None. It's the perfect sleep. They close their eyes, they open their eyes, and there's Jesus. So you do not have to fear death. It takes the guesswork out of it. It's Occam's razor. It is perfect sleep. No time will pass when you die. If you put your trust in Jesus, no time passes. You close your eyes, you open your eyes, and there's Jesus. It's beautiful. It's simple. It's wonderful. But you might be thinking, all right, Pastor, this sounds okay, but it doesn't sound okay because I'm still here. I'm grieving somebody that I've lost. I'm grieving my son, my daughter, my mother, my father, my loved one. What do I do about it? How do I deal with that? There's a story in John chapter 11, and I'm going to read this to you. It was too long to put on the screen, but I'm going to read it to you. John chapter 11. This is the story of Jesus' good friend Lazarus. And you see Lazarus mentioned in a couple different places in the Bible, in the New Testament. And Jesus gets word that Lazarus is sick. And let's pick up the story. "Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, in the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, 'Lord, whom you love is ill.' But when Jesus heard it, he said, 'This illness does not lead to death.'" Did you hear that? This illness does not lead to death, because death to Jesus is something you don't wake up from. He knows Lazarus is going to wake up from this. "It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Okay, hold on. This is Jesus' friend, right? You'd think that he would immediately run to his aid to heal him, but Jesus doesn't do that because there's a bigger plan in place here. He stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and now you're going there again?" And Jesus answered, They're not 12 hours in the day. If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. He says, don't worry about this. I'm the light of the world. There's 12 hours in the day. Things have passed. It's going to be safe. Verse 11, and after these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to wake him up. So then the disciples sort of respond with the natural thing. Okay, well, if he's sick and he's asleep, that's good for him. Why are we going to wake him up? He'll get better. Now, Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he had meant taking rest in sleep. Jesus is avoiding that word death, died. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. And so Thomas called the twin. He says, okay, let's go. Let's go. So then we have this exchange where Jesus walks into the town, and Lazarus' two sisters come running out to Jesus, and they say, oh, Jesus, if you had only been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And there's sorrow and agony, and there's mourners all around, and it's just excruciating. And interesting that Martha says, I know my brother will rise again on the last day. He doesn't say, I know my brother's in heaven. She doesn't say, I know there's no resurrection or never live on, or that he's with us now. He says, my brother will rise again on the last day. I know this. So verse 28. So Jesus is there, and there's weeping, and they're crying, and his presence isn't even helping. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher's here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. And the Jews who were with her in her house, consoling her, saw Mary rise and go out quickly. And so there's crying and angst, as I said. And so when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews, I'm in verse 33, who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. So prior to this, Jesus had said to Mary, I am the resurrection and the life. So there's all this mourning, this heartbreak going on. And he looks at them and he says, don't you all know that I'm the resurrection and the life? I can bring your brother back. I can help him. There's something I've learned over the years in ministry. When someone dies as a pastor, I usually go and I'm thinking, what can I say? What can I pray? What can I do to help these people feel better? And what I've learned is that over the years, there is nothing in those moments that you can say that's going to make it any better. Most people are not even processing anything, and they don't even remember what you say anyway. There is nothing you can say in those moments when someone has first died that's going to make it any better. And Jesus had just gone to these women and said, I'm the resurrection and the life. Hope is here, and they can't see it. And listen to what happens. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved, and his spirit was greatly troubled. So think about this. He is in their midst. He is with them. He's standing there, and he has the power. He's God. He can do anything. But his presence isn't even consoling them. It's not even consoling them. And he said in verse 34, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And listen to these words. Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Jesus is crying. Why? Why is Jesus crying? Jesus knows what he's about to do, and what he's about to do is raise Lazarus from the dead. Here's why Jesus is crying. Because death was never something that we were created with the capacity to have to deal with. We were made perfect, and we were made to live forever. That's how we were made in the Garden of Eden. Death is unnatural. Death is not something that God made. Death is foreign to God. Death is foreign to us. And Jesus realizes in this moment the weight of death, of how it impacts humanity. I'm sure he knew this before, but actually being there with people that he loved, walking amongst them, and him realizing that anything he even says in this moment is not going to make it any better. Because death is not something we were ever made to have to deal with. That's why it hurts so much in your grief. That's why you're crying. That's why we mourn. That's why we go to the great expense of having funerals, to remember the person that's gone on. Because deep within us, we know death is unnatural. Death is not something we were ever made to have to deal with. Even Jesus, there's nothing he can say in this moment that's going to make it any better. And he cries, not because Lazarus is dead, not because he can't raise him from the dead. He's crying because he sees the damage that death causes to us, the trauma that it causes. And even he in this moment can't make it better. It's heavy stuff. That's heavy stuff. We mourn the death of those we love because deep within us, we know we are not meant to have to say goodbye. Death is unnatural. So what we need to do is when we mourn someone that we love, we need to remember that that is evidence that we were made for a place where we never have to say goodbye, where there is no death. So mourning is actually proof that we'll see them again one day. When we are sad, when we're mourning, and in the moment, there's nothing we can say. We just have to mourn, and we just have to cry because we're experiencing a trauma we were never equipped to have to deal with. And as those days go on, and the mind begins to clear, we can begin to understand the reason we're sad is because this isn't supposed to be. And there is coming a world where we will never have to say goodbye when Jesus comes. Think about it. If we were just, evolved animals, if we just came from ooze and were just happened by chance and there's no heaven and there's no God, death would just happen and we wouldn't care. Under that ideology, all we do is we live to pass on our genes, to pass on our DNA to the next generation. That's the only reason why we're alive. But we mourn because there's something more that we were made for. Perfect world, living forever. And deep within us, we know we were never meant to have to say goodbye. So our mourning can be proof that we are going to see that person again one day. Our mourning needs to turn into joy. So Jesus weeps. Now, listen to this. Powerful, powerful stuff. Isaiah chapter 53, 4 and 5 says, surely he has borne, he's carried our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God. So we rejected the very one who came here to carry our sorrow, carry our shame, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. This is talking about him taking on our sin and our sorrow, but it says he bore our griefs. Jesus weeps here because he's taking the weight of death upon himself. My friends, what I want you to know is that God knows how awful you feel that you've lost someone that you love. Jesus knows the trauma. Jesus knows the heartbreak. Jesus has carried your sadness. And the fact that he has is the reason why he went to the cross. In the Garden of Gethsemane, before Jesus was crucified, if you read that story, he actually sweat great drops of blood. And this is actually a true physical phenomenon that happens when someone is under intense stress. It's only happened a handful of times. Intense stress, unbelievable stress. Friends, Jesus was sweating blood because he felt your sorrow. He felt your trauma. He was carrying it. And he loved you so much that he went to the cross to overcome death that separates us from the ones that we love. So in heaven right now, as this next verse is going to tell us, it says, we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. So it's not just about sin and temptation. This is about Jesus knowing exactly what your grief is like. So the point is this: you are not alone in your grief because you had to say goodbye to somebody that you love. Jesus intimately knows how bad it feels, how awful it feels, how depressed you are, how sad you are. Jesus knows intimately. He's carried your pain. He's carried your sorrow. He's carried your trauma. He's felt it. He's felt you in those sad hours when you're doubled over with grief. There is a God in heaven who knows exactly how sad and how distraught and broken you are because he carried your brokenness to the cross with him, which is why we can know he's with us in our grief. He's with us in our sorrow. He's with you every step of that traumatic process of planning a funeral, seeing your loved one in that coffin, lowering them into the ground, and then the sorrow of the days that follow. Jesus knows exactly, and he's right there by your side. He knows how awful this feels. And the thing is, he knows that your loved one's going to rise again if they love Jesus. He knows that he can bring them back from the dead, but he cares about you in those moments of waiting until he comes. He cares about you so much that he's right there with you. He's reaching out to you. He's holding you. He's caring for you. Don't lose hope. Jesus loves you, and he'll never leave you. Listen to what he says in John chapter 16. Now, he's talking literally here about that he's going to die on the cross and he's going to come back. But this really applies, these same words apply to us now. John chapter 16. So also you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you. Wow. He's talking about his resurrection. But friends, because of his resurrection, these are the words of your loved one to you. You have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you. When we see Jesus again, no one will take our joy from us ever again, because one, we're with him forever, and two, we're with the ones we love forever. You know, no matter what you believe about death, you're still separated from the one you love. And to me, it's more comforting to know exactly what death is. Death is just a blink of an eye. Your eyes close, your eyes open again. That's it. And when our eyes open again, our joy will never be taken away from us. No more death, no more sorrow, no more crying. Revelation chapter 21 says this exact thing. Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Death shall be no more. Death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning or crying or any more pain, for the former things have passed away. That's when Jesus comes. So friends, we're separated from our loved ones right now. And if we take the simplest explanation for what happens when we die, it's literally just a blink of an eye. Your eyes close, and then just like a perfect sleep, Jesus is coming back and our eyes open. No time passes for the ones that we love, and when we die, no time passes. And then when we wake up, we are going to a place where we never have to say goodbye ever again. Never again will you ever have to say goodbye to the person that you love. You will be reunited with them forever. So friends, no matter what you believe about death, what happens when you die, you're still separated. And what I want you to know and understand here is that Jesus intimately knows the trauma that death causes. He carried that trauma. He carried that pain. He carried that sorrow. And he died on the cross because of it, so that you can have the hope of living with him forever and seeing your loved one again and never having to say goodbye. But you know something, and I say this at every funeral I do, the only way you get there is to put your full trust in Jesus, to surrender to him, to confess your sins and fall at the feet of the cross and say, Jesus, I need you. I love you. And if you do that, you'll never have to say goodbye ever again. The trumpet's going to sound really soon. Jesus is coming, and there will be no more sorrow, no more crying, and no more pain.